Welcome to Windows on the World, back from our travels, and shortly, well quite soon, going on some more travels. This week we've got plenty of news for you. Mr. Piers Corbyn is on his way. We're going to talk to Francis Leader and Sandi Adams. Of course, Sandi was doing the talks with us, the bigger picture, which we took to Salford and Lytham St Anne's. I did 2 talks at Lytham St Anne's. Second one was all about the system and who we are in it. Paupers, actually, but we can be divine human beings. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? But it's all part of that talk. And really, we are in the post-truth world, so we're going to be talking about that again this week. I see we've got quite a few people in chat. Oh, Angie's in. Thanks, Angie, for putting us up in sunny Salford. And thanks also to Rob, who put us up in Lytham St Anne's near Blackpool. Great people, really good time we had, and it all went really smoothly. That was the great thing about it. It was minimum stress, which is great, because having spent loads of years travelling around doing gigs on my own, I got used to a system where I would reduce stress as much as possible. And these talks we've been doing have been incredibly stress-free, actually. But yes, what do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? A new financial system. When do we want it? Well, it's all about climate change. Why is it all about climate change? I don't know, but it is. Cryptocurrencies are a globalist bankers, IMF-controlled scam. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? We're going to get onto that tonight because a very interesting article appeared which is all about cryptocurrencies, and really it's the sort of stuff I've been talking about for a long time as relating to them. But we'll also be uploading new videos soon, and look at our shows about UK government subversives. We've exposed these many times on Windows on the World. In fact, I'd say it's a bit of a speciality because it's like this shadow government that runs through everything. But I'm constantly being made aware of the connections through information gleaned from people who are listening to the show, so thanks for that. And the dots never stop connecting. This gets to a point where the sort of same old thing is being recycled over and over again with just a change of name and a few new change agents thrown into the mix. It's like an industrial level of interconnected organisations controlling the narrative of public opinion. It's immense, this stuff, and that's why I cover it a lot, because this is really how governance works. It works in this sort of unstructured way. Now, those who are receptive to social engineers have one thing in common. They do not do any due diligence or fact-checking. Now, this has become very apparent over the last few weeks when we've been looking at the latest climate change rebellion, which we're going to talk a bit about tonight. I don't want to get too boring with this, but it is quite important at the moment because lots of people are getting swept away with it all, and it's quite hilarious in some ways, but quite concerning in others. We'll try and get to both of those issues, both the hilarity and the concerning bits, as the show goes on. But those who are receptive to social engineers, they do have this one thing in common. They don't do any due diligence or fact-checking. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm not really talking about young people here. I'm talking about older people. It's quite astonishing when you put very simple questions to people about organisations that they're supporting and they know nothing about them. So that's how social engineering works. Keeps everyone distracted in an endless cycle of nonsense. So once the interconnected nature of NGOs, think tanks and even charities are discovered, a template emerges, and that's the template that we have been putting out for many years now. This is the public arena arm of a shadow, unstructured governance which most of the public have no idea even exists. The fact that the same templates are used over and over again means one thing: yes, it does generally work. So the psychological aspect is well thought out, but in actual fact childishly simple. I think I've reiterated this a few times, but I think it's really important. So the fake news protests, the fake protests, lobbying groups and agents in local councils are mass-produced clones mentored into this global action plan, the one we talk about all the time, the one that people on local governance actually imposing this call a conspiracy theory when they're actually nailed down to the facts. And when stating the obvious, there is usually a blank look which does not comprehend anything you have just said. I've had this quite a bit recently. It's really funny. You say something like, well, do you realise this group that you're supporting relies solely on a document produced by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have produced many of these documents, none of which have ever come true, are based on models and projections, and they're not based on science. And they look at you as though you've said something that's completely alien and that they have no idea about. Why? Because they haven't got any idea about it, and it is totally alien to them. So even when the ideology of fake protest groups is explained, many who are following them have no idea what you're talking about. And so how many shows have we done on this? Just to reiterate, I'm going through some notes here. Well, it is more than a few, but there's always new angles. I wanted to talk about one particular organisation called the Department of Psychological and Behavioural Science. It states on its website it's about complex socio-technical systems, organisations, communities and societies. Well, that covers quite a lot, doesn't it? Organisations, well, yes, communities and societies. Our research deals with real-world issues, they say. And guess what? We train the future global leaders. Now, I've been looking at these organisations for a long time. This is just one. Of course, it all comes down to the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, into think tanks like Demos. They're very connected with all this. And then we get into all these fake protest groups, which we've covered pretty much in great detail. And I'm constantly finding new avenues here. Well, but what's interesting is that the link to the so-called anti-globalists and the globalists is actually very, very strong. So that's something which I think deserves a lot more attention than it gets. However, Department of Psychological and Behavioural Science state, as professionals, we know most challenges and bottlenecks in managing such systems as corporations or cities. What cities? They manage cities, do they? That's interesting, isn't it? That these are not technical, but rather psychosocial, inducing or avoiding specific individual motivation and behaviour, solving intergroup conflicts, overcoming resistance to change. Oh, wait a minute, I think I've spotted one. Overcoming resistance to change. That couldn't mean bringing in trained facilitators using Delphi technique, could it? You know, where you control the group. Fostering constructive decision-making and avoiding exclusion. Well, that's interesting, is it? Because according to the UN, nobody will be left behind. That's UNESCO, actually. They're talking about education. That education into being a global change agent is something that cannot be left out of the curriculum. So these issues, it says, are urgent considering the limits to sustainability of the current global system. Psychological behavioural science, or BS as I've just called it here, provides psychological science and tools to current and future managers and professionals. It trains the new generation of leaders who will face the acute problems of governance foreseeable around 2030 to 2050. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, that coincides with the UN Global Action Plans. That's quite a coincidence, that, isn't it? It couldn't be that all these things are interconnected, as we say in our talks, the bigger picture. Well, this is when the last stages of Agenda 2030 will be the most draconian, and the world population will be down to the global billion, aimed at being 2 to 3 billion to start with by the global elite. We're going to talk about who they are in a minute, because a lot's talked about this. I've looked into it all, you know. Martin sent me a great diagram today which is almost like a Kabbalistic tree of life of all these organisations that link together, including Freemasonry and all the rest of it. Very interesting. Thanks for that, Martin. And I think I might even put that in the talk, because it does show you how these groups are interconnected, and at the top there's no resistance to change. They are all in it together, and no, they're not going to be left behind. It says here anyway, it provides solid basis and tools for social engineering to practitioners and leaders. Now, this is why we're getting all these brainwashed kind of people who can't make a decision for themselves, but they're incredibly arrogant and difficult to pin down. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the police, local government, or anybody else in what they call public office. Last but not least, PBS is a friendly, I think that might be Mr. Corbyn there, coming through on the jelly bone at Windows Towers. I think he's going to be a bit late tonight, but he's on his way. Last but not least, PBS is a friendly place where we believe one can be world class and still human. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, why would they try and put that in at the end, nearly the end, on the website, so that they're trying to really reinforce the fact that they are still human? Change agents are human too, you know. So let's get on to someone who I know, an organisation that I know have stopped a lot of things up and down the country with their particular change agents directly linked into the intelligence services. They're called Hope Not Hate. They're a limited company and a charity. And I've just found some stuff on them which I thought would link into what we are talking about tonight, the bigger picture. It says Hope Not Hate Educational Limited and Hope Not Hate Campaign. They're in UK, France, Hungary, Netherlands, and more countries actually. And their purpose, it states, is to provide a community organisers training programme for local anti-hate organisations. Can you see how this fits together now? Interconnected with Soros. I mean, people focus on Soros and his open society. It's got a lot to do with it. But outside that, this is just another structure that includes the Soros groups. So when I've been looking into this, and everyone I've looked into who is a change agent has been linked into all of these groups which I've found. It's really interesting stuff. I put this in the talk. And what this means is that people in public office and in high positions are mentored to be there. They don't get there through hard work. Now, this is the weird thing, isn't it? Because I was doing my stuff for ages, you know, producing shows and doing my live shows and all that, and you think, where do these people come from who are absolutely no good, and then they're on telly all the time, and then they get really good script writers, and then a lot of them do get better, but now we know they're probably future leaders, you see. Now, the purpose is to provide a community organisers training programme. This is one of their actual agendas. Now, the training model will combine the experience, the organising and campaigning skills developed and used by Hope Not Hate in the UK and United We Dream in the US. Oh, you see, it's global. It's global local. Through training sessions, they will help participants understand how change works. Well, okay, so they're going to help participants understand how change works. Now, what change is that? Being a change agent, you see. This is what we hear all the time. Remember Cameron in his big society? It was all about change. Obama, change. His community organisers, the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, used by Obama and instigated to be used by David Cameron over here. So once you start putting this together, it is the Brave New World training ground for useful idiots. It says through training sessions, they will help participants understand how change works. Now, just step back and think about that for a minute. Both politically through action and electoral mobilisation, and at a community level around developing shared identities and a common narrative. Exactly the narrow corridor of accepted narrative and opinion. That's what they're talking about. In other words, you're either with us or the terrorists. If you voted Brexit, you're a terrorist. You're like those terrible murderers. You know, the ones who killed the MP. We've done a great show on that. Look at that, Joe Cox Murder and Propaganda. But when you look at how Brendan Cox, the husband, was promoted, and what he set up shortly after his wife's death, and who she left, basically wanted money to be put into from the Joe Cox Foundation. It went to the White Helmets, the mercenary group in in Syria, and Hope Not Hate. Now this is really, really suspicious, because anybody contributing to those groups, in my opinion, is actually being a traitor, because they're supporting the shadow government, and the shadow government is not what the general public know about, or would, if they did know about it, they would not have the things done in their name that the shadow government is doing. This is why I think it's a really good idea that people focus on maybe trying to get the intelligence services under more scrutiny, because the intelligence services, MI5, are now going to be dictating to the police who's going to get arrested for being far right. And of course you've got the prevent strategy, and of course came out of contest, so you're going to have to sit in front of your counsel and explain yourself, and then be put on a mentoring course, maybe even tagged. Maybe you're going to have to fight envirocrime, who knows. There's many ways the council can get you on their work programmes. Well, I'm just a mad conspiracy theorist for even thinking about that. Wait a minute. No, it's true. We took down their Grimebusters site a few weeks ago, didn't we? Where they were actually labelling citizens who hadn't been fined and hadn't actually committed any offence as enviro criminals, and putting their pictures up. Well, we soon sorted that out. It was all pulled off the next day when I made my complaint. But anybody can do this stuff. That's why I like doing it. So we get a bit of satisfaction about it, actually. Demos, another one. Demos, public policy think tank. They're mobilising the vote through social media. This was in 2014. It's all about, they obviously want people to stay in Europe. And this project aims to make social media tools available to civil society organisations throughout Europe so that they can mobilise people more effectively. It's an absolute dystopian nightmare. Demos will produce tools and techniques like open source software that could be used to analyse real-time Twitter data in order to allow campaigners to increase turnout of target groups. This is military they're talking here. This is like military language. This is what the military use. If you look at things like the 7-7 Brigade, who are there to monitor people on Facebook, the Chindits as they like to be called in Berkshire, controlling the narrative on social media, this is how they talk about it. So Demos and all these think tanks, and of course Hope Not Hate, they are just merely an arm, an extension of the military industrial complex. That's all they are. And they talk like that. They have the same kind of speak going as the army do. It's quite amusing when the army do it, but when these groups do it, it's a bit sinister. So these tools will be made available online free of charge. Demos will also train advocates and civil society groups. So they're going to train them now, are they? So you've got your group, which is only going to be taken notice of if it's a change agent group with a change agent in it, and they're going to actually change it even more. That's good of them, isn't it? I thought they were a think tank. Well, think tanks drive policy, and all linked into the British Psychological Association and the Tavistock Institute. Look at the British Psychological Association, some of the rubbish that they put out. Quite incredible. The Demos and their unreality of conspiracy theories. That's worth looking at, because they don't actually talk about the theories. They talk about the way we talk. We have to talk about the theories, you know. So these tools will be made available online free of charge. Oh, that's very good of them, isn't it? So basically, yeah, they're doing this all over Europe. We talked about that the other week, actually, the European Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, in this country, we're represented by people who have the public interest at heart, such as Chuka Ramuna, PMSL. So, yeah, basically, community organisers, we talk about these quite a lot. But if you look at community organisers and check it out online, you'll find that they are linked into a lot of stuff that's happening locally. So the Company of Community Organisers, an organisation that support communities and the people in them, supports people to develop projects which they mentor, campaigns at local level, influences policy by bringing people together, and is helping to transform the lives of the poorest people in England. Oh, it must be all right then. Must be all right, nothing to see here. Social cohesion is being stretched by growing inequality, the degradation of our common assets and services, such as green space, libraries and leisure facilities. So they're going to come in and run them for you. They're called community hubs. And a fragmentation and polarisation of political engagement. Okay, so yeah, they're going to control the narrative there. Anchor organisations, here we go, play a facilitative role in their local neighbourhoods. Oh yes, of course they do. They open them up and they control the narrative, often acting as a hub. Oh, talk of the devil, for community groups and organisations in the area. In many cases, literally housing these groups. Oh yes, of course, keep it all in-house. There's a place down in Hackney where they house all these fake anarchist groups, and it's interesting actually, because over the weekend we found out that lots of people were actually linked into that as well. It's funny that, isn't it? Yeah. And a lot of them are on LinkedIn as well. That's always worth looking at, LinkedIn. You'll find loads of change agents on there, and they all know each other. Yes, we need to ensure that communities are able to take on control of assets rather than being encouraged to take on liabilities that local authorities can no longer afford to maintain. Well, that's like the Housing and Planning Act and all this stuff. What they're saying there is we engage in social cleansing, because that's exactly what that means. Taking control of assets is what the change agents do. They take over assets. Sometimes it can be a pub. Oh, they'll start a community pub. But in actual fact, it's not being run by the community, as we found out in one of our shows, which you can still hear, still getting quite a lot of hits, that charities and small venues under threat. Take a look at that one. We have updates on that coming very soon, by the way. But yes, interesting stuff, when you look at what they actually, because most people don't actually look at this stuff, but what they say is they have a strong and diverse membership. We will significantly grow our membership, reaching out to community organisations, yes, all the ones that are linked into you, who share our vision and values. Well, they're not the vision and the values of the general public, they're the visions and values of sustainable development. Yes! And ensure that members feel proud to be part of locality and have a significant impact in shaping our work. Now, I'm not saying everyone involved in these organisations is wrong and corrupt. They're absolutely not. It's just that they're being mentored into something which most of them don't even understand, which was what I was saying at the beginning of the show. So I'm going to get onto something now before Mr. Corbyn turns up. And this is all about... Let me try and find it, because it's really interesting, about cryptocurrency. This is globalist schemes. Let's talk about globalist schemes. And this was by Brandon Smith of altmarket.com. Now, he's written something which really resonates with me here, and it's exactly the sort of stuff we talk about, and it is the bigger picture, so I'm going to read it out. He says, there are two kinds of globalist schemes. First, there are the schemes they spring on the public out of nowhere. This strategy loses effectiveness quickly, though. The longer the plan takes to implement, the more time people have to reconsider what is actually happening and why. Very good point there, because we've seen that time and time again. If they keep repeating the same thing over and over, and it takes longer to implement than they think, it starts to fall apart. And we're starting to see this with the regeneration schemes, all this sort of stuff. Second, it says here, anyway, this is the second type of globalist scheme. There are schemes they slowly implant in the collective psyche of the citizenry over many years, much like subliminal messaging or hypnosis. I talk about this in my talk a lot, actually. Talk about it in my talk. Well, I would, wouldn't I? This strategy is designed to make the public embrace certain destructive ideologies or ideas as if these ideas were their own. Now, that has never been truer than with what's happening at the present time. And it's exactly how ideological subversion works. Look at Yuri Bezmenov, Ideological Subversion on YouTube. And we've actually used some of his clips in previous shows. He was a KGB defector in the 80s, late 70s, ended up in India pretending to be a guru with all these fake gurus and people who'd got into marijuana and meditation, you know. But he carries on here anyway. The cryptocurrency scam is of the second variety. In other words, there are schemes that slowly get implanted into the collective psyche of the citizenry over many years. So it's like a form of false revolution. And it really ties into these fake revolutionary groups, because the cryptocurrency is almost presented as rebellious, and of course it isn't. It's absolutely controlled, and that's the interesting thing about it. That's why I wanted to bring it on tonight's show. He says, I have been suspicious of the cryptocurrency narrative of a decentralised and anonymous monetary revolution since 2009, when I was first approached by people claiming to be representatives of Bitcoin and asked to become a promoter of the technology. After posing a few very simple questions and receiving no satisfactory answers, I declined to join the bandwagon or act as a frontman. The currency was backed by nothing tangible, and maths is not a tangible source or resource, he says. Anyone could create a cryptocurrency out of thin air that had attributes identical to Bitcoin. Therefore, there was no intrinsic value to the technology and nothing stopping the creation of thousands of similar currency systems, eventually making Bitcoin worthless. The scarcity argument for crypto was fraudulent, and in the event of a grid down or an internet lockdown scenario, as has occurred in the past in nations under crisis, crypto was useless because the blockchain ledger was no longer accessible. Really good point, could be crashed at any time. But what he's saying here is really fascinating to me anyway, because I know people who got involved in these cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, and I'm now hearing that it's starting to drop away in value quite considerably. But again, it's like anything. It's the confidence in something that gives it value. Once you bring in artificial scarcity, the price goes up. Once you flood the market with it, the price goes down. It's really, really simple. Then you can undermine it and it'll collapse. I mean, this is how the City of London makes money on futures, so why would it be different with a cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is futures, it's the same thing. So if you've got someone handling your future, then you have no control over it, do you? A bit of an aside there. Trading with private wallets made little sense. How many people were you likely to run into in your community with a Bitcoin wallet? The amount of time and energy required to accumulate these digital nothings seemed counterproductive to me in the light of the fact that they might not be there when you actually needed them. The only attributes that truly made Bitcoin valuable were its branding and the amount of hype that was generated around it, but branding and hype are not enough to sustain a currency revolution. There was one other valuable characteristic, the supposed anonymity. In 2009, it was not clear whether this was legitimate. Today, we now know any cryptocurrency that is based on a blockchain ledger is highly traceable. There are no anonymous digital transactions, no matter how savvy a person thinks they are. This is a really good point, because the whole idea of the Bank of International Settlements and the IMF is that they want to trace every monetary transaction on the planet. So what does Bitcoin do? It traces every transaction that is actually put forward. I mean, I'm a great believer in cash or bartering, because that keeps it out of the system, and that is where you actually are free, when you're out of it. That's why they make it so difficult to be out of it. So this to me was joining it. That's what I always thought about it. I was also suspicious of the behaviour of some Bitcoin proponents, he carries on. In web forums, anyone presenting concrete criticism of the technology was met with aggressively Alinsky-style attacks. Now, we talk about that all the time. This is so interesting, isn't it? Because this is what you get in fake protest groups. This is what you get with change agents. You get Alinsky-style attacks. Look up Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. They can be used for good or bad things. But these people work to a template. So if they're working to a template with Alinsky style attacks, then it's organised, isn't it? So they were accused of being ignorant, barbaric gold stackers that were too stupid to understand the genius of the blockchain. That's exactly how it works. So you obviously don't understand it. You know, you've got no knowledge, you're a Luddite, all the rest of it. And how it works. Disinformation was rampant. Claims of anonymity that had long been debunked were brought up over and over again. The value of Bitcoin. Yes, this is another thing. They repeat the same thing over and over again. These change agent groups, they just keep going on about the same thing all the time. And Saul Alinsky rules state a drag is a drag. Never let anything drag on too long, but they always do. The other thing they do is they use ad hominem attacks, but they never use humour. And Alinsky says humour is a man's most potent weapon. So there's certain Saul Alinsky rules they don't use, but they do use a lot of them, so that's worth looking in. Martin Houston, silver more practical than gold, so government charges 20% VAT on silver bullion coins to frustrate the market. Well, you can get round that by buying it in Jersey, I think. I know a friend who did, but the point is that silver's gone down, I believe. I don't think it's as high as when this particular person bought it years ago anyway. It carries on anyway. I was also suspicious of the behaviour of some Bitcoin promotes on web forums. Yes, we've had that. Disinformation was rampant. Okay, these were the kind of tactics I had seen used by disinfo agents in the past. People arguing in favour of the Federal Reserve or globalism in general, or the people claiming that man-made global warming was self-evident. This was not the behaviour I'd come to expect from liberty movement activists, who at that time were focused on facts and evidence to win the information war rather than dishonest mind games and lies. Conclusion. There was a concerted campaign to push liberty activists through peer pressure to adopt a pro-crypto stance, but who actually benefits from this? Crypto is also an effective distraction from people trying to build precious metals-based alternatives to the current economic environment. Bitcoin siphoned up activist energy and redirected it into something useless rather than a system that might truly threaten the central banking establishment. Hear, hear. Carries on. Beyond that, the entire crypto storm over the past decade has done one thing very well. It made the idea of cryptocurrencies a household discussion, and I believe this was the goal all along. Once I found growing evidence that international and central banks were deeply involved in building the infrastructure needed to make blockchain technology to go global and universal, it became obvious that Bitcoin and other coins were merely a pre-game test for the introduction of something rather sinister. In my article, he carries on, this is Brandon Smith, in my article, The Globalist One World Currency will look a lot like Bitcoin, published in July 2017, and in my article, The Virtual Economy is the End of Freedom, published in December 2017, I outlined the questionable nature of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain and why the banking elite seemed to be so interested in them. It was a bit odd that Bitcoin was built around the SHA-256 hash function created by the National Security Agency, and that the entire concept was remarkably similar to what was described in an NSA paper published in '96 titled How to Make a Mint, the Cryptography of Anonymous Electronic Cash. Then there were globalist institutions like Goldman Sachs coming out publicly in praise of crypto and blockchain tech. And finally, central banks began entertaining the notion of moving into crypto, but they made it sound like they were approaching the idea half-heartedly, like it was a potential hobby. So what ties the entire crypto scheme together? The International Monetary Fund has now openly revealed their affinity with crypto technology and thus revealed the New World Order endgame. In a paper published last week by IMF head Christine Lagarde, we know all about her, titled Winds of Change, The Case for New Digital Currency, the IMF builds its argument for why central banks, including the IMF, should embrace crypto as the future of monetary policy. As I warned last year, the shifting to crypto was not at all a revolution against the globalists, but a con designed by the globalists in part to get liberty proponents to become unwitting salesmen for the next phase of the economic control grid. But how do they intend this endgame to play out? Very similar to fake protest and fake community groups. This is my input. The Global Action Plan posing as an underground movement is always obvious when the template has been properly analysed. That's my little coda to that. It has to be simple to be rolled out by those who are simple to those who are gullible and simple. So it's rolled out by simpletons who are rolling it out to people who are gullible and simple and don't actually do any research whatsoever. So ideological subversion, order out of chaos. This is a little aside before we bring in our first guest. It's about the vagina monologues. It says the vagina monologues, this play where women talk about their vaginas, has had its performance at Eastern Michigan University cancelled because it excludes those who have had their penises cut off and not pretending to be women. This is actually from Breitbart, which I don't go along with. I don't go along with its alt-right, fake alt-right stance because I know exactly where that's coming from. But this is quite a good article. So the survey respondents opposing the production consistently indicated they were concerned that the play centres on cisgender women, that the play's version of feminism excludes some women. Well, it doesn't exclude women, it excludes men who think they're women, including trans women, and that overall the vagina monologues lacks diversity and inclusion. This is just brilliant. The survey was launched as a result of conversations with current students, as well as feedback from a WRC workshop titled Not All Women Have Vaginas during the 2017-18 academic year. According to WRC, both brought up conflicting ideas and concerns about the effectiveness and relevance of vagina monologues, an episodic play written by activist Eve Ensler in 1994, offering a series of first-person narratives in which women speak about their vaginas. Okay, so that's the post-truth world for you. That's the post-truth world story this week. But NGOs and fake charities. Going to talk about them too. The pro-third world invasion, or it's also known as Doctors Without Borders. Again, charities are well, we've done a lot of research into charities, and it's not good. So Doctors Without Borders, it's organisation illegally dumped more than 24 tonnes of dangerous waste in Sicily, polluting several ports, and its employees now face criminal charges in Italy, and their fake charity rescue ship, the Aquarius, will be seized if it ever enters Italian waters again. Sicilian prosecutor investigates the 24 MSF employees, orders Aquarius seizure. That's the headline. Rome, the public prosecutor's office in Catania on the Italian island of Sicily, launched on Tuesday an investigation into 24 people, most of which work for the non-profit Doctors Without Borders, and has requested the seizure of the NGO migrant rescue ship Aquarius due to the alleged mismanagement of waste on board. Now, this is incredible, isn't it? So, upon hearing the news, Interior Minister Matteo Salvini confirmed he was pleased he had blocked the NGO from accessing Italian ports. Now, it's interesting this because it seems to be that some governments are onto these kind of fake charities, and this is just incredible, isn't it? Dumping tons of sewage and waste into the ocean, and they're meant to be an ethical charity. We know what ethical charities get up to. We know what Hope Not Hate get up to. They get up to stopping actual meetings of things like the death of Princess Diana and sending Antifa around to attack OAPs. They shut down festivals where people want to speak about relevant political issues. That's what they do, because if you're outside the narrow corridor of accepted opinion, then I'm afraid no one will be left behind. So that's it, yeah, good stuff. I'm going to get Francis Leader on first of all. But first of all, it's just to get into this thing, it's about this Extinction Revolution. We went there yesterday and we caught the tail end of it, where 9 Guardian readers, well, they look like Guardian readers. They look like the sort of Guardian readers who are called sort of hipsters, look like those sort of people. And there was about 9 of them on the floor chatting very smugly to each other, covered in Bako foil blankets, and legal observers and a line of policemen slightly bemused. And we took our signs down there, which you can see on our YouTube video, Globalist Warming Hoax Day. We took our banners down there and we actually met some quite interesting people. And what was particularly interesting was that there was a father who'd driven his son down there from Gloucester, and he said, "I've driven all the way from Gloucester for this." And then I informed him of some of the facts. In other words, that it all revolved around the SR15, which is an IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change document, which basically says we've got 12 years to save the world, and it hasn't got one fact in it. And he didn't know anything about that. And the poor chap kept saying, "Well, I drove all the way from Gloucester," as though that kind of backed up the reason for the whole protest movement, Like, I've increased my carbon footprint to come here, and my son is laying in the road. But to be fair to them, they were quite nice people, and they took our leaflets, and I think the fellow was genuinely surprised. So what's interesting is that, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, people get co-opted into these things, and it's like, it's incredible, But and just before I bring Francis in, someone posted about Extinction Rebellion. It's it's a guy in Sweden pontificating about it, but underneath was a post, and it was about, someone had posted our article, and it says that someone had put underneath it that article, in other words, windowsontheworld.net, Fake Rebellion Explained, the article and the video. It says that article has a number of inaccuracies, such as the reasons offered for the pseudo-criminal damage. They are using chalk spray so it washes off with no damage, it says. Now, wait a minute, we did say they're encouraging them to actually get up to criminal damage. Well, they were spraying stuff on that Department of Business Technology place, the one we went to the day after. And someone got arrested yesterday, actually. I don't know what they were doing, whether it was spray they were using, but a fella came up and started spraying something on the floor. He was pounced upon by cops. It could have all been staged for all I know. I don't know. He's bundled into a van. It was very quick, though, the reaction. But he says, yes, this get this, right? This should whet your appetite for what we're going to say. Yes, establishment figures are involved, and it is very likely they have sympathisers within the British intelligence services. And this is a good thing. This is the meant to be debunking our article, by the way. I cannot help but note that the article also does not address the major truth claim that is motivating people, namely climate change. Well, I think we've gone on about that quite enough. I mean, scientists have been on our show for years talking about climate change, and that the climate change that they're talking about is fake. And And I think that is kind of put over within the context of the show, which is linked to it very, very strongly. So they probably haven't listened to that. It says, namely climate change, our role and how pressing the problem is. The science is pointing towards validating these protesters' point of view. No, it's not. It's the opposite. Unless you buy into the conspiracy theory that climate change is a hoax and has nothing to do with our overconsumption. Well, I think we've addressed that quite nicely. At this point, I'm going to try and get hold of Frances. I hope she's listening, because I've been going on quite a long time there. But so I'm going to bring Frances in now. I'll have to do it on the phone. So I'll just give her a call. Frances Leader. I'm going to call Frances Leader now, because Frances was on the show a few weeks ago, and we had a really, really good insight from Frances about the Extinction Rebellion, indeed many forms of protest. Good evening,
Hello.
Frances. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So, have you been listening to the show so far?
Yeah, it's been really funny. You had me laughing.
Well, I've actually just been reading out other people's stuff for a change, because I think it's quite important. I mean, I thought that article about the cryptocurrency was extremely revealing, because he just nailed exactly how these people think. It was just so well written,
Well, that actually is the conclusion that my son and I have come to. He's been very keen on watching cryptocurrency. And last November, BP decided they were going to make a consortium to buy into cryptocurrency, Bitcoin to be precise. And all of a sudden, the value of Bitcoin shot through the roof. And then just before Christmas, somebody took out, presumably this consortium, stacks of it, and the price plummeted and has never recovered. And we were like, wow, what a Christmas present BP gave themselves. That was the most obvious piece of manipulation, and you have to hand it to them. They only had their money in it for a month, and they made it more in that month than any of us would ever dream of.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about globalists. We're talking about people who are rich beyond our wildest imaginings. Once you've got that much money and you start to get influence and you start living that lifestyle. I mean, I've kind of had a bit of a brush with those sort of people. I mean, I used to be in entertainment, and you do these corporate parties, and these people a lot of them are quite degenerate in my opinion, because there's sort of rampant use of cocaine and absolute arrogance that runs through a lot of them. They're not all like that, but there's a general tendency for that, and it's this social Darwinism thing that they're all brought into. In other words, it's all about, it's that kind of 80s thing gone on from that, hasn't it? It was that traders thing in the 80s where the cocaine culture really started to get a grip, and I think that what we're seeing now is just the whole globalist thing. When you look at it and the actual influence of global governance, then it's pretty obvious what's going on. But let's get back to this. We were going to talk a little bit more about this Extinction Rebellion thing, because it is in the news at the moment. We've covered it quite a bit, but there's also links with this lady, Gail Marie Bradbrook. She was part of a thing called Compassionate Revolution. She made the speech outside Buckingham Palace. We were talking about this earlier on. I did watch that, by the way. And
Did you?
yeah, it's kind of childish and a bit laughable, really, but I suppose it has to be taken seriously in some ways, because you were saying, another point I wanted to bring up, in actual fact, it's quite important, is that you were saying that a lot of people have been co-opted into this from actually doing genuine sort of activism. Could you just address that?
Well, when I listened to Gail giving that, what it was actually was her reading out her letter to the Queen, facing Buckingham Palace with a loudspeaker and reading it out line by line and getting the crowd to reiterate what she was saying. And as she went through the speech, I listened very carefully, and really it is the most beautifully written document I've heard in a while, because it reminded me of a horoscope. Everybody would have loved it. You would identify with every sentence of it. There was nothing you could find fault with. And what it was doing was encompassing all of the different strands of eco warriors and vegans and every kind of conscious person, and everyone who cares at all about life, and let's face it, that's everyone. I mean, even the birds flying by must have been flapping with joy at what she was saying. It was a brilliant piece of work. But as I pointed out to you earlier, what this has done is brought together all the groups, and the Extinction Rebellion live streamer was actually saying that, we've brought all the groups together. But what I'm seeing from my position as admin of Anti-Fracking International is a death on the fracking sites. Literally, I mean, while they're doing that, there was a 30-hour lock-on at Tinker Lane, where they're just gathering the stuff together to drill for the fracking. And this couple, young couple, nice people, locked on for 30 hours in the rain and horrible cold. And there was no one there. There was no one, because everybody has just moved away from the traditional sites for defending against fracking and showing our feelings, and all shot down to London in coaches and God knows what to take part in this event. Meanwhile, this couple are on their own up there by the gates, doing a lock-on through a tube. Not only that, but what I'm saying really is the Extinction Rebellion, it has a wonderful theme, and most of the people that are involved are clearly great-hearted people, but they are depleting and siphoning off people, energy and funds from the front line.
It's what Agenda 21 is all about, Francis. It's all about the management of energy. And this is a global concept. I mean, the thing is that the general public have no idea how a lot of these people think, and that's what we try and cover on the shows. This whole idea of this social Darwinism, and also this management of energy, like the technocracy. I did a show with Sandi all about the technocracy movement. You know, it's all about energy. It's about the control and distribution of energy. And what you need to do is get people working in fairly mundane things and then waste the rest of their energy in things of no importance. And most people do waste their time in issues of absolutely no importance. And I'm not sort of beside the outside the door of that. I mean, I've had my time wasted a lot over the years, and when you look back on it, you think, yeah, well, in actual fact, you have to be conscious about this stuff and start looking at it properly. Now, if we look at this group, and this lady, Gail Marie Bradbrook, she's connected to the Broadbanders Stakeholders Group. The Broadband Stakeholder Group has published a report on lowering barriers to a 5G deployment. It outlines the challenge and solutions to deploying new mobile infrastructure necessary to meet the UK government's ambition to be a 5G leader. The report, Lowering Barriers to a 5G Deployment, is the outcome of a study by Analysis Mason, researching barriers to 5G deployment from both industry and local authority perspectives in the UK. So the whole rollout of 5G locally is part of this as well. By association, it appears, identifying key challenges faced during the deployment process. The report aims to assist the UK government in delivering its ambition to be a 5G leader by identifying and proposing solutions to current and potential barriers to network deployment. So they want to get everybody saving the world by radiating themselves to death. It looks like here. Legal barriers, deployment issues and challenges with stakeholder engagement all have the potential to delay the rollout of 5G. Taken together and against a general background of uncertainty regarding the business case for denser 5G networks, these could also ultimately limit the deployment of 5G infrastructure. They're also linked to the Department of Culture, Sky, TalkTalk, Vodafone, Wireless Infrastructure Group, and that's the Broadband Stakeholders Group. Now, when we talk about stakeholders, we hear this word a lot, and when we talk about change agents, they are always talking about their stakeholders. So this is the thing. I mean, it says basically Compassionate Revolution now rising up. This was what it all came out of, is an activist collective that that's seeding widespread action against our ecocidal, unjust and corrupt system. Well, they seem to be saying that on one hand and promoting it on the other, and inviting us all to explore and implement the alternatives. We spoke to Rising Up, but I've got an interview with this lady anyway. But basically, it's a lot of sound bites, like to embed activist culture in self-care, and for some of us, a spiritual orientation toward protecting that which is sacred. It's all getting a bit sort of new age there. So we've done a lot in a short space of time and had quite a few successes helped by our distributed organising model based in holacracy. Now, I just want to bring you back in, Francis, because you've been updating your article on this. Have you got anything new to tell us?
Well, yes, actually. I've got so much news to tell you, I hardly know where to start. I've got loads of stuff lined up here. First of all, I think the most disturbing thing that has shook me, literally shook me, is they have a fundraiser online. And that fundraiser is sitting now, after only a fortnight, at £85,795. It's had 1,444 contributors, so these must be hefty contributions that have been added in there. In addition to that, I'm finding that... if you would like to support Extinction Rebellion financially, I'm reading this, by the way, a regular standing order would be perfect, as would one-off donations. So in addition to that 85,000 fundraiser in a fortnight, they've also got this other account, and the account numbers are all here saying, standing orders or money transfers should be made to our Triodos bank account, and there's the code and the account number, in the name of Compassionate Revolution Limited, which is the holding company for Rising Up. Alternatively, if you're into PayPal, you can make them a nice, comfortable payment using their info@risingup.org.uk. So they've got two that I know of, funding streams. And I'm thinking to myself, what are they going to spend all this on? And I'm thinking the cost of getting people to run around London and stop traffic are pretty much zero. The cost of filling up bridges with people also pretty much zero. The flags and banners you see them with all over the place are pretty negligible and reusable. The sound systems are probably borrowed. In fact, we know that's the case because we saw Phoenix fiddling with them, so they must have come from him, and we all know about Phoenix. I don't think I need to go into him.
Yeah, Phoenix was around for those or our international viewers. He's a sort of professional activist, and he gets around a bit, does Phoenix. In fact, I've been at festivals, and he's just appeared at the side of me, He's a well-travelled man.
Well, the way I see it is what they are doing is the timing of this is crucial because of the recent release of the IPCC SR15 document, and they're literally cashing in on the catastrophe announcement and on the general air of unease and fear. They're cashing in on people's desire to be seen as doing something, like that old thing, virtue, what was it you called it?
Virtue signalling.
Virtue signalling, yeah. Oh, look, I've contributed to this, therefore I'm helping to stop climate change. How does any of this stop climate
Francis,
change?
for as little as 65 pence a day, you can sponsor a child in Africa, and they'll tell you his name and her name and everything. I mean, you're so cynical, I just don't get it.
Well, look, obviously this to raise this much money in just a fortnight is very concerning. And I was also sent a screenshot of their original appeal on the fundraiser, which stated that they were going to use some of the money so that one of the organisers could dispense with their day job and work full-time for Extinction Rebellion. But that paragraph has now been replaced with a very bland sort of remark. So I think most of all I find it very concerning that all this money is pouring out of people's, nobody's well off at the moment. As Julian Brock is he's a truck surfer that was arrested after having done it was more than 90 hours on top of a truck, him and 3 others. I'm sure you remember it. There were 4 of them. He unfortunately was remanded in custody because of a muck-up with getting to court. And so he was actually in custody for a long time, and nobody really talked about him. He's just sent me a message saying that people have been disempowered by this government and the globalists, and that is why they are protesting in the first place. Then they become disempowered and exploited by them all over again by supporting a controlled opposition protest. Surely it stands to reason, I'm reading the message he sent me.
Yes.
Surely it stands to reason that we should not support any protest that's been put in place by the dark forces that we are fighting against. When playing a game of chess, you would never allow your opponent to move your pieces around. So why do we allow control opposition groups to organise us? It is to be expected that some people crave the self-empowerment that they get from protesting and direct action so much that they don't really care who's pulling the strings or pocketing the funds, as long as they get to protest and feel a bit of empowerment. It's also giving all the wrong-uns a platform, as I've discovered that there's a big difference between feeling empowered and truly being empowered, and I don't see the organisers of XR as empowering anyone.
Well, no, it's a facilitator type led thing, same as all these other template protests.
He goes on. He's really thought about this. You can tell.
It's brilliant, Francis. Carry on.
He says, yes, XR, meaning Extinction Rebellion, have empowered people by giving them a microphone for their speeches and songs, and of course with the opportunity to take part in direct action. But I don't hear the organisers say anything about looking after those who might be going to jail. Furthermore, if the organisers of these protest groups can't be trusted with money, then should they be trusted to coordinate and enact a rebellion on our behalf? Never allow others to disempower you. Love and light, Julian Brock. I really am happy that he took the time and trouble to send that to me, because, sometimes I think, is it just me that's been unnerved by these people? But that is not the case. I've had messages all day today and communications from people who are all very unnerved by what is happening. It does feel as if we're being depleted and siphoned and directed into complaining about climate change, when that is only one very, very small aspect of the things that we need to be concerned about. Now, in the Queen's speech that Gail gave this afternoon, she did mention a multitude of things. As I said, she was literally sweeping everyone together, saying, look, we have to deal with all these issues that our government is imposing on us. And I thought it was, as I said to you, I thought it was a very cleverly written piece of work. And I can see that the vast majority of everyone that was there, the vast majority of people, their hearts are in the right place. They do want change. And they feel like the only way to get change is to kick up a stink because every other way of protesting has failed up until now. That's what they feel like. But we have been succeeding with protesting at the gates of the frat camps, for example. We've slowed down quadrilla to a halt. They haven't done anything for 2 weeks. Very strange things are happening on that site. The membrane seems to be bubbling and shifting and sinking. It seems as if the bloody pad is sinking. Not only that, they're not drilling, they're not pumping, they're not fracking. And today, or was it yesterday? It was yesterday, some liquid nitrogen was delivered to the site. So I got in touch with a friend of mine who's in the oil business. As you know, my husband used to work in the oil business, so I still have some contacts. And I said, why would they need liquid nitrogen on the frac site? And he said, well, they're going to try and freeze something. And I said, yeah, but why? And he said, to stop it exploding. Something's wrong. And while something's wrong, all the protesters are being pulled down to London to dance around outside Buckingham Palace and number 10 Downing Street, and big little holes in the grass in Parliament Square. Meanwhile, something really dodgy is going on.
Well, that's the idea. It's the distraction principle. Another great idea from the book of psychological subversion. The distraction principle is supremely important, and getting people to lie down where they can't be seen is also extremely disempowering. Mr. Corbyn's just arrived, and what we're going to do, we're going to have a little break now. I'm going to come back with another show, and we might bring you back, Francis, because I think you've got a bit more to say. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this one, and we're going to come back for part 2 in 15 minutes. So that's it from this part of the show, everybody.
Thank you, Francis.